Hello and welcome to Silicon's Security Day 2022. My name is Charlotte Kahn and I am a business and tech journalist. I am delighted to be your host today. We are online together for a couple of hours to discover insightful tips and thoughts on the topic of security culture, followed by a roundtable where we will discuss different ways to boost your organization's security with the power of security culture. As you know, many of today's wars and attacks, as seen currently in the news, sadly, are also waged in cyberspace, and companies and institutions are more exposed than ever. IT infrastructure is more complex and diverse, and workers need flexibility and productivity tools to work from any device and any location. For this reason, today more than ever, the security culture and the knowledge of employees is the most powerful tool to protect information, continuity, integrity, and the reputation of our businesses. So in this edition of Silicon Security Day 2022, we will hear from industry experts and security practitioners who will tell us how to address best practices and which tool solutions can provide organizations with a strong cybersecurity culture that allows them to innovate safely and be more competitive. So let's proceed with our first guest of the day, with whom we will discuss the current status, challenges, and importance of security culture in organizations. I am delighted to be joined by Jelle Wieringa, who is Security Awareness Advocate at KnowBe4. Jelle, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Jelle, before you start, I'd like to introduce you. In your current role, your mission is to help organizations of all sizes understand why more emphasis is needed on the human factor, the very important human factor, and how to manage the ongoing problem of social engineering. So let's hear a bit more from you. My first question is, in the previous edition of Silicon Security Day, you talked to us about how humans are easily deceived by cyber criminals in many different ways, which shows how important the human factor is for organizations when it comes to protecting them. So what is the state of play currently within organizations in this respect? Do you think that they give enough importance to the security of their own employees, or do you think that they rely possibly a bit too much on technology tools?
That's a good question. So what I see happening is that organizations are growing increasingly aware of what it means to build a proper security posture, and that you should combine people, technology, and process together for the right situation when it arises. So I do see that organizations still rely a lot on technology. And if you do that too much, you basically lull yourself into a false sense of security. But we also see that organizations are very rapidly adopting security awareness training as part of basically the basic hygiene of employees. That they're using it for onboarding their employees, they're using it to train them to become better in the job, because security awareness training is all about teaching people and providing people with the skills to exemplify secure behavior. And that means that they can do that in their job, they can do that at home. Doesn't really matter, but you make your employees not only work in a safer way, so you protect your organization, but you also protect your employees. In essence, what you're doing is you're building on your your employee retention. People that feel safe, that feel enabled to do their job well, actually stick with your company longer. So it's an investment that we see that organizations are doing. And this shift from security awareness being purely that, only training on security and only providing skills in that regard, is slowly moving onto the awareness that, hey, security awareness training has a job to fulfill. That's larger than just that training part. You can do so much more to it. You can build human firewalls that protect your organization, and you can enable your organization, your employees themselves. So that's what we see moving now, what we see happening now. We're not there yet, but we're making a great effort.
Jelle, what you are describing reminds me of parenting toddlers to a certain extent. You can have those stair gates everywhere. You can use foam to surround your tables to smooth the angles of sharp tables and so on. But really what you're telling us is that it's actually important to empower people to look after their own security.
Yeah, well, I believe in the fail fast principle, right? You can't prevent people from failing. That just happens. People make mistakes. It's human. It's who we are. So the only thing you can do as an organization is make sure they fail fast and get up without being hurt too much. Neither you nor that employee. So it does, well, I don't want to say it's like training toddlers, but it does have a lot of resemblance to it. You want to make sure they can work in a safe environment, but they get the opportunity that if they make a mistake, they get up quickly, learn from their mistakes and keep on going, because in the end, that's what you want to do. You want to create availability for your organization, continuity. That's why you train people.
I very much like the idea of this human firewall concept that you mentioned earlier. Now, Jelle, what's the difference between a security-aware organization and an organization with the right or correct cybersecurity culture? Is it the same thing?
So being security aware and having a correct security culture are not necessarily the same thing. So with security awareness, being security aware, you train your staff and make them aware of all the aspects of security, including providing them with the right skills to have secure behavior. It's a bottom-up approach, basically. You focus on the individual and enabling that individual to exemplify secure behavior. With security culture, it's a top-down approach. So you focus on the organization as an entity, as a whole. And you focus on the ideas, the customs, and the social behaviors that impact the security of your organization. Now, these two, while they're definitely linked together, you can do one without the other. But if you want to have a proper security posture, if you want to maximize security in your organization, you need to spend time and resources on both of them. So they're part of one another, basically. If you focus on them, and do it right, then, well, that's how you build security. If you do one part and not the other, you can still have security, but don't be alarmed or fooled if you see gaps appearing. That's basically the gist of it.
So, Jelle, how do you go about it? What would you recommend as the first step to help an organization acquire this culture of cybersecurity throughout?
Okay, first of all, acknowledge it's not an easy thing. You need to really work at it. It's not something that if you don't put any effort in there, it's not going to come. That's simply the way it is. So you start by evaluating what your current level of security culture is. Be very honest about it. Look at it, make sure that you look at it at face value, and then you decide, okay, where do we want to actually go to? What's our goal here? And if you know where you stand today and you have your goal, you can basically dot the line and see how you can get to that goal. So that's the first step. Now, if you have that goal in mind, you need to make sure that you understand that you're not doing it alone. It's everybody's responsibility. Everybody needs to join in to make this happen. In order to get that done, in order to get everybody to understand what they're doing, you need to communicate. So communication is essential in this process. And to be fair, fairly often forgotten as well. So you need to communicate on the why you're doing this, what you want to achieve, what progress looks like, and what your end goals are. And once you've got that communication down and you involved your organization into your plans and into your motivation, then the next step becomes very important. And that's next to responsibility, it's everybody's responsibility, you also need to make somebody accountable. Make a person responsible and accountable for building that security culture. It can be a board member, it can be a CISO, it can be a manager, or you can have a dedicated chief security culture officer in your organization. Whoever it is, make sure that that person is enabled and supported to do their job. Because if they're not, well, you basically guarantee you slow the mice of all of your efforts and your work. So it's important to, one, decide where you want to go, two, communicate about it, and three, make accountability or set up accountability for it.
Finally, Jelle, I have an additional question. Okay. It's hard to change people and human behavior, isn't it? Do you find that there's a certain degree of resistance to the idea of creating this security culture, or actually people are quite willing to embrace it in order to protect themselves and their organization? I mean, what have you experienced on that front?
Well, what I've experienced is we're all humans. So motivation is definitely key. That's why communication, for instance, in that first step of security culture is so important. If you don't involve people, if you don't make that effort, people won't feel involved and they simply don't want to participate. They'll actually revolt. So you get revolution, and that's not what you want. So sure, it can happen that people don't want to participate, don't want to add value to your security program or security culture. Although I do see that if you do it in the right way, make sure it's done in a fun way, in an interesting way, in a way that's relevant to the users, in a way that they feel involved and they feel a valued member of that process. I hardly ever see anybody not wanting to participate, because everybody understands that if you work for an organization, you need to protect that organization. You need to protect that their customers. You need to protect their reputation. That's probably for everyone that works in an organization an intrinsic value. So if you can just address that value and make that value work for you as an organization, well, you're pretty much good to go. That doesn't mean that everybody understands how to do it, and that's where you need to help them. That's why security awareness training comes into play. You need to provide them with the skills to enable them to do their part. And once you do that as an organization in a fun, relevant way, you're pretty much good to go.
Yellow, thank you very much for your insights. You are staying with us. We'll speak to you very shortly. You are going to join us for our round table. But it's time to join our second guest of the day. Our second expert is Kai Rohr, who will tell us about the security culture maturity model he has developed. Kai is currently managing director of KnowBe4 Research, where he's responsible for security culture research. Now, prior to founding CLTIE, Kai created the global standard security culture framework. And I'd like to also add that Kai is an award-winning specialist on security behaviors and security culture, as well as the best-selling author. What an introduction. Kai, welcome.
Thank you so much, Charlotte. It's a great pleasure being here. I would like to make one minor change to that introduction. My title is Chief Research Officer at KnowBe4. Culture, or CLTRE as you pronounce, is merged into KnowBe4, and my role here is, I'm the global in charge of all things security culture research.
Apologies. Thanks for pointing that out. So, Kai, you're here to tell us about this maturity model you have created. So here you go. The course is yours.
Thank you so much. I did not create this all by myself because, hardly ever do you ever, create things by yourself. You do it with other people. So the security culture maturity model is something that my team at KnowBe4 Research and key people at KnowBe4 work together to develop. But before we go into the maturity model itself, let's take a little look at security culture. So a couple of years ago, Forrester and KnowBe4 did a global survey of security leaders. And one of the things we wanted them to tell us was, how important is security culture to your security program? And a whopping 94% of security leaders around the world told us that it's either important or critical to their security culture program. Now, that is awesome, right? Amazing that people believe that security culture is important. Now, we wanted to dig deeper, obviously. So we wondered, so what is culture for you? Do you have it? And the short answer is yes, everybody have it. The problem, though, according to John Childress, is that you get the culture that you ignore. And the point here is, obviously, if you don't know what your culture is like, then you don't really know what it is. And it may be good, it may be bad, it may be strong, weak, something else. You really don't know. Another challenge we saw then was that although security leaders agreed that we need security culture and it is critical and important, they didn't really, they weren't able to tell us what it is. And that's why we at KnowBe4, we believe that we as an industry, we need to have a clear, easy to use, easy to apply definition of security culture. We have adopted this one, which comes from the Security Culture Framework, which was created by myself and a team 12 years ago, 2010, 11. And this definition is saying that security culture, it's the ideas, the customs, and the social behavior of an organization that influence that organization's security. Now, with this kind of definition, we, all security leaders, all researchers, everybody can now start talking about the same thing and understand the same thing, and then discuss this thing as the same thing, instead of I talking about one thing, Quentin about something else, Jill about something third, which is what it used to be, but no longer. Now, another benefit with this kind of definition is that we can create an understanding of where you are, where we are, and where organizations fit in. So, for example, this one is how we have seen security awareness evolve over the past 30 years, or throughout my career, basically. So in the beginning, you would typically build some sort of program yourself, maybe create some PowerPoint, death by PowerPoint, you probably heard that. And then at some point, you maybe wanted to source some content from outside, especially as we saw companies providing and selling standard training programs. Then roughly 10, 15 years ago, we started to see phishing assessments. And this is basically figuring out what can we do to figure out what employees are clicking on, how they're doing it, so that we can adapt training to help them avoid doing those things. Still, much later, this is typically 5 to 10 years ago, we started to see meaningful metrics. What do we mean by meaningful metrics? Well, in this context, it means that not only do I see that my employees actually do some phishing, and maybe if they do get some training, they may change, but I know exactly who is doing what. And then I can use that to target specific training to that individual or that group of employees. And that's why measuring is really crucial here. And then when you have those things in place, you can start working at a broader scope, the security culture. And security culture is more than just assessments and measurements. It's about the people as individuals, and people in groups. And with this kind of ammunition, this kind of background, 30 years experience, a number of people around the world working together, we decided that, okay, it's time to create a maturity model. But very quickly, we also agreed that a general or a typical maturity model have some weaknesses. So, for example, they typically lack precision. What do we mean by precision in this regard? Well, often a maturity model will tell you something about something that may progress, but they don't really give you any clear metrics or any clear direction on how you can figure out where you are on that maturity path. Typically, then that means that it's up to your interpretation, your guesswork, and of course, depending on your daily mood, you may place yourself in a good spot or in a bad spot or whatever. But the problem is that you lack precision and evidence. And we believe that when it comes to a security culture maturity model, not only do we need that model, but we need to provide the industry with clear indicators of where you are so that we can actually provide a path to improvement. And one of the benefits with KnowBe4 is that we have a huge set of data, which is why I do my job, right? I love having this ability. We have more than 44,000 customers around the world as a company. These customers have employees. So we are counting tens of millions of employees around the world, or individuals, people, if you like, who have access to our tools, who have access to our measurements, our trainings. We can measure, for example, their knowledge, the culture, the behaviors, a lot of different things. And because of that, we are also able to analyze these data points and look for patterns, golden nuggets, if you like, and correlations. maybe even we can find causation eventually. Who knows? Now, with this data, we decided that, okay, let's use this data, let's apply it to a maturity model. And what you see now is the proposed security culture maturity model that we created based on this data. It was long in the making. It took us quite some time to dig through data and identify the patterns and understand the meaning or meaning of it, or interpreting it, if you like. So like traditional maturity models, it comes with a number of levels, level 1 through 5 here. And we have named each level to make it easier to relate to it. The first one we call basic compliance. And by basic compliance, we consider organizations that do some awareness trainings, typically focusing on closing compliance gaps, meaning that there are some regulatory demand, or maybe they had some audit and that they need to do something in order to at least check a box. The observant of you will, of course, think that, but aren't there also companies that don't do anything? And sure. But those level 0, let's call them that, or maybe even level negatives, we consider them not having a maturity worth actually putting in a model. So the first level here is about basic compliance. You do training, you do some effort. Level 2 is security awareness foundation, and this is awareness training. So you do train employees, you have some programs in place, and you try to influence the behaviors and the knowledge and the understanding of security as a threat. You may even have some assessment tools like measuring phishing behavior or some other behaviors. In level 3, the interesting stuff starts happening. We call this the programmatic security awareness and behavior. And by that we mean, at this stage, you do trainings, you do assessments, and you automate it. You take, for example, data from a phishing assessment and tie it to an individual. So, for example, me, and then give me a training specific to my needs. An example here is that we do see a lot of, especially during Christmas and holidays, we see a lot of this package delivery notes, right? You have to click here and pay a small amount or something. Let's say that I am one of those people who will click on those phishing emails, but I don't click on anything else. But those specific ones, they get me every single time. Then we believe that when you are at level 3, I get training attached automatically that helps me identify and not click on those things. But everybody else in my organization who may not need that, they don't get that training because it would be a waste of time and resources. So that's an example of level 3. Now, on level 4, things starts to get really interesting, because now we're looking at not only doing training and assessments and measurements, and not only at automation, but also supporting behavior and culture and awareness by other tools. One example could be that you have monitor systems on computers or networks that will catch me in the act, if you like, and then either stop it from happening, or give me a just-in-time training or a nudge or something to help me do it right. Another example here would be implementing technology to help me to do the right thing, make it easy for me to do the right thing, because I am a human, and not only are we fallible, we are also lazy in the sense that we will take the shortest way out. So that's level 4 for you. And then level 5 is what we call sustainable security culture. Here is where you see organizations that take all of these things into account and make sure that they play together. But the key here is not really security culture, because all of these levels we can consider security culture. But the key here is the sustainable part. Sustainable in this context means that you are able to adapt to the changes in the threat landscape, adapt to the changes in technology, in regulatory demands, by changing workforce. All these things are influencing your security and your security culture, and being sustainable, meaning that you are in control. You can make the necessary adjustments when they are needed to make sure that you sustain a good security culture. Now, you also see that there are red dotted line here. The red dotted line, we consider the breach likelihood, or the likelihood that your organization will have a security breach, and the expenses or cost, both for remediation and handling it, and also on psychological factors like employee belonging and all those things. What is interesting is that only when you reach level 3, you will start seeing a dramatic decline in this, both the likelihood and the cost. And especially when you reach level 4, we see that these expenses are dramatically reduced compared to level 1 and 2, for example. Likewise, the blue line represents the development of the security culture. And it's not only culture as in this concept, but it's also in specific artifacts, like, for example, behaviors. There, my light went out. So let me see if I can turn it back on. There we are. So behaviors like phishing. I'll show an example in a second. Also knowledge. So, for example, at KnowBe4, we have a knowledge mapping tool called Security Awareness Proficiency Assessment, where we ask employees around the organization specific questions to measure the knowledge. What we see that the higher their knowledge level is, the better the culture is, the better their behaviors are, and the more mature they are. I don't know what is going on with my light, so I will just pretend it's still on. One of the really cool things we believe with the maturity model is what we call culture maturity indicators. Indicators in this case basically are different measurements points, or metrics, if you like, that you can use to figure out where you belong on the maturity model. I didn't mention data, so a lot of this is based on data or data-driven. So, for example, phishing development, phishing or phishing behavior changes in the organization. We also measure knowledge, as I mentioned. We measure security culture, and a lot of other things. A key point here, though, there are 2 key points when it comes to this culture maturity indicators. Number 1, we are adding to them constantly. So this is a growing list. It already looks pretty awesome with 27 of them, but this is something we are adding to. The second important point here is that you don't have to use KnowBe4 products or services in order to get access to these indicators. You can create your own, and you can also use the descriptions here to find data in your systems and in your programs to give you these indicators. I did mention security culture measurements, or the security culture survey. So 7 years ago, my team and myself, we started a project to figure out how can we measure security culture. And one of the challenges with security culture is that it is sort of, difficult to make tangible. It's difficult to touch. But we teamed up with some really amazing researchers, including Dr. Gregor Petric out of Slovenia. And we came up with a way to identify 7 dimensions of culture that influence security. And they are here. More details on the dimensions can be downloaded in white papers we have. But the point here is that with these 7 dimensions, we are able to measure security culture very, very accurately and very, very detailed. Why does that matter? Well, because you can use that data as one CMI and add it to the model. So what we see here on this model, for example, is all the gray dots are organizations, customers of KnowBe4, who has used the security culture survey to measure their security culture. And then you see them spread out across the maturity model. We see that most of them are in level 2 and level 3, which is not surprising. I mean, they do a lot of things. More and more of them are adding automation. But I hope in the future to see them move from 2 and 3 into 4 and 5. I think that would be awesome to see. And of course, as this industry evolves, as products evolve, and as organizations mature, we should see that shift. This is just a very brief example of how you can use CMIs to figure out where you belong on the model. And here you also see that, well, different CMIs will give you different placements, which is another reason we believe that having more CMIs is actually better than having just one. Let's say that you just have the one up to the left there, basic program. So you have just determined that, well, we have a basic program in place that places us in level 2. And if you don't have the other indicators in here, you will believe, oh, okay, I am in level 2 only. But then take a look at adding a few others, for example, phishing program. Yes, we do automating phishing program and some intervention there. So that places us somewhere between 3 and 4, maybe. And then you can add more of them. And suddenly you start realizing, oh, wait a second, we are not doing that bad. Number 1. And number 2, maybe I should start shifting those who are in level 2 towards level 3, because that will give me the lowest hanging fruit, cheap, easy, effective way to improve. And by moving that into level 3, I will actually have a much better security culture maturity. So this is one example. I did promise to show you some of the data that my team has provided. This is a bit complex and messy. Please excuse for that. But on the left-hand side, you will see 2 behaviors. The tallest one is phishing emails opened. So basically, employees opening phishing emails. And then the other one is credentials shared. What does credentials shared means? Well, basically someone opening a phishing email and typing in their username and passwords. So something you really don't want your employees to do. And what you see with both of these behaviors is that as your culture matures, that kind of behavior dramatically drops into almost non-existent on the right-hand side. The 3 other curves here are security culture, so that's the green one, employee knowledge, or SAPA if you like, that's the red one. And what you see there is that as knowledge evolves, culture evolves, and vice versa. These 2 things are really tightly connected. Then the third one, phishing emails reported, is one we find very, very interesting, because what we see there is that as you mature your culture, the more people with Discover successfully report phishing emails. And this says something about responsibilities, the employee's ability to discover these things, and their feeling of need to secure the organization, which is really, really important and awesome. And so these are just a couple of examples of security culture maturity model. Now, let me give you a final suggestion. If you want to know more about what I have just shared, so both the definition of security culture framework, security culture maturity model, and how a number of experts around the world is dealing with these things, please feel free to get the latest book that I have written together with my amazing colleague, Perry Carpenter. This will be available on Wiley on April 19th, but I'm told you can pre-order already. With that, thank you so much for this brief presentation of the security culture maturity model.
Okay, well, Kai, thank you so much for a brilliant presentation. Now, it's time to join our other guests for our roundtable on how to boost your organization's security with the power of security culture. So we are also joined by Quentin Taylor, his Chief Information Security Officer, EMEA at Canon, and Silicon UK's Editor-in-Chief, David Howell, for discussing different ways to enhance security culture. So welcome to all of you. And let's start with Quentin. Quentin, let me introduce you first. Quentin, you have driven Canon's strategy to highlight the importance of document security and help business customers to minimize their security risk. And you strongly believe in educating users about the importance of a holistic security policy so your business customers can improve security in a cost-effective way. So Quentin, thank you so much for joining us. And first of all, could you maybe set the scene for us, present us with the threat landscape from your perspective?
Yeah, so I think the threat landscape is ever changing. I mean, we saw yesterday one of the threat actor groups making an open request on social media that if you work for any one of these particular list of companies, and they're all high profile companies in an IT position, then they will offer you several $1,000s for you to either look the other way, install a backdoor, just give them access. And they were even quite clear that even if you don't work for one of those companies, if you're a supplier to one of those companies and you want to make some easy cash, then you can reach out to them. And if you've got access to a Citrix environment or VPN, if you allow your credentials to be compromised, they will give you, one presumes, thousands of dollars in cryptocurrency. And so I think we've got a completely changed threat landscape, that we've not just got the ability of people to be fooled and people to click on things they shouldn't click on. We've also got threat actors going to some of our partners, going to some of our customers, going to some of our staff members, saying, if you give access to us, we will pay you directly. And you know what? No one will ever probably know. And that's where the threat landscape has changed dramatically over the last few years, that direct access. Let's stop trying to trick users into clicking on things. Let's just appeal to those users' sense of greed and entitlement and pay them to deliberately let me straight in. It cuts out the middleman.
I love how they try to harness the best and the worst of human behavior, really. And where would you say cybersecurity threats mostly come from today? Because we're also seeing the rise of new and unconventional threats like doxing and reputational attacks. So what are you seeing from that perspective?
I think doxing and reputational attacks have always been around. I think they've just become a lot more powerful now. I think that the change that a lot of people are worried about, obviously, is due to the current geopolitical situation. But I'd like to really point out that for a lot of people, the changed geopolitical situation is more a concern to them because they're looking at that and not looking at the threats that are there and have always been there. So that focus on the basics, it's very, very easy for people. We as humans are neophiles. We like to focus on the new. We like to focus on the new threats, whilst forgetting that the old threats are just sitting right there, and they're probably the ones that are going to hit us.
Thanks. I'd like to join our editor-in-chief in the UK, David Howell, for maybe your views, David, of what you've heard so far.
Yes, and I look at the sort of threat landscape, and for me, it has two components. The first component is people. Often the focus is on building security systems, or often the people that will be using that system or the people that system touches aren't often considered in enough detail, because often they can be the weakest link, as Quentin was pointing out. It's something that is fairly new, that kind of bribery, let's call it that. But I think these days, cybersecurity, and particularly the attacks that happen, they're almost in stealth mode. They're looking for ways to infiltrate systems. And I guess the scary part is a lot of the time they will infiltrate a system and you will not know. The infiltrator, the threat actor will be on your system potentially for months and you have no idea. So the second part of where I think a strong security is the focus, is understanding, it's the view. And that's data. That's understanding how your systems are operating, looking for anomalies, looking for any small changes that may have happened in your system, maybe over the previous few weeks or months. Those stealth attacks, because you don't have sight of, I guess, what's happening and how the landscape is changing for your particular business. You will not be able to spot these anomalies. So for me, it's two things. It's looking at your systems. It's having the sight of what's changing, but paying attention to your people as well, because they, as we've heard, they could quite easily be the target for quite new attack vectors, which are kind of coming into focus now. So those two aspects of, I think, security should be front of mind, particularly for businesses. Kind of as they move forward and as they look at what their businesses will look like in a sort of post-pandemic business landscape. Those two components, I think, are vital for security.
Kai and Jelle, would you like to follow up on this? It is true that at the start of this security day, I did not really spend much time asking you about the cybersecurity landscape today and where you think most threats come from, other than humans, of course.
I actually, Quinten already said it or alluded to it. Like, sure, there's a lot going on in this world, and social media and traditional media are almost hyping it in a way. But that doesn't mean that all of the other attacks that are there that were already happening aren't there. What we see now is that, especially now, is that when something as big as a war, a election, or a pandemic comes into the news, bad actors, threat actors, actually use that opportunity, use that topic to build their phishing campaigns around, their social engineering attacks around. So what I usually tell customers or tell people is, look, yes, you can look to the left, but don't forget about the right? So you can definitely pay attention to what's happening. You can definitely heighten the awareness of the organization and be extra vigilant to what's happening now in the geopolitical scene or with the pandemic or something like that. But also make sure that you keep on training your people on the basic stuff, and make sure that your people understand that bad actors actually leverage that media hype to build campaigns and to manipulate people. That's what's happening today. And other than that, like, cybersecurity, there will always be threats, always, and they will always be growing. We're always in that rat race to catch up with them. We'll never win as good guys, unfortunately, but we can do our absolute best to keep up. And that's where collaboration comes in as well. So it's not about that individual only paying attention to his security posture, about looking at his emails and thinking about phishing emails. It's about the entire organization doing that. That's where security culture basically comes in. So I think that today, now, it's more important than ever to approach security as a total organization, as a group.
Yes. Do you also think it's security, and you're not alone either? You mustn't look at your business in isolation, because you are connected to your customers, you're connected to your supply chain, and every other company out there that connects to your business. So don't think that security is just focused on your business. You have to look wider, because the attack vectors could come from supply chains that maybe you've been working for years, because that's how they will find their way into your business. So it's that idea that, social engineering attacks are not going to go away. They certainly will not. But have a think about how your business connects with every other business, because that connection, that could be another avenue for an attack. So you're not alone in that respect. Do have a look at your entire landscape, and your entire landscape includes every other business that you are connected to.
Actually, you make a very good point there. There was a Japanese car manufacturer who was compromised last week or the week before. And it turned out that actually it was the supplier of the plastic parts to the car company that was compromised. But one thing I would just quickly like to say is, although we're focusing very heavily on the supply chain and the ransomware, please don't look away from business email compromise and payment fraud. That they are the ones that are basically getting away with huge amounts of money, because business email compromise can lead to ransomware, it can lead to fraud, it can lead to all kinds of nasty things. But payment fraud, all payment fraud is me being able to send your accounts payable people an email or a letter or anything and say, can you update the bank details for this particular customer?
Yeah. And how many times have we seen that in the news? Yeah, that's
and it doesn't even get in the news. And by the time it happened, it can be months later when a company calls you and says, "Why haven't you paid us?" And then you suddenly realize it was changed. And this is endemic in certain parts of the world. And the thing this is the bubble I'm about to burst here, is this isn't really an IT security issue. It's a finance process issue. It's how do you change your key financial records? And a lot of information security people get locked into it because it's fraud, it's interesting, and they start thinking that they can fix it. No, you can alert the finance people and say, this is what you need to be doing. But if you can take one thing away from here, ask your finance people, how do you update bank account details, which can also be for staff members as well. There was a private jet leasing company in Hong Kong where someone contacted the private jet leasing company pretending to be several of the key salespeople and asked for the bank account details to be updated. And when their multi-million-dollar bonuses on the jets that they had leased came in, they actually went into the fraudster's account and not into their own accounts.
Yeah. Is that an education issue? Is that really they just don't have the tools? They don't have the education to understand that?
Issue.
It's a process issue.
I think it's more
a culture issue. So process is definitively part of it. Education is definitively part of it. Technology is definitively part of it. Put those three elements together, you get culture. So and one of the challenges with people, process, technology is that if you change one of them, the two others automatically get changed too, which means that, to your point, David, you need to have a holistic view. You need to make sure that whatever you do somewhere in your organization or supply chain, you need to be able to, figure out what will that influence, how will that change things. But also, to your point, how will it change things if I don't make that change?
Yes, I think that's right as well. You cannot do nothing. You just can't. You must not think that
you can do nothing. But
you can do nothing, but
you get to a very bad place.
Well, you're going to get your fingers burnt, or maybe your bank account emptied. So you could do nothing, and that's the easy route. But you have to do something. And I think it's important, I guess, to take a step back and I guess audit where you are, how you do things, who you connect to. What kind of security systems do you have in place? Are they robust enough? Even, I think, as we mentioned, even down to simple things like, do not click on an attachment to an email. Just simple things like that. Because social engineering attacks can be catastrophic, for a business. But I think it is right. I think it's a holistic approach. It's looking at all of those components and integrate them together. And that integration, that becomes your security policy. And moving forward, that must evolve. That's not a case of we've done security, move on. That has to be an organic thing which develops over time. And that then hopefully gives you robust security, which can react to really what's coming next. More importantly, it gives you a solid foundation of what's come before. I think that's the approach that businesses ought to take as we move into post-pandemic.
Yeah.
So what you described there is the level 5 of the security culture maturity model, sustainable security culture. You may also call it with another name, the Holy Grail. I totally agree that that's where we need to be, but I'm not really confident that we will be able to get there, at least not shortly, because exactly of that change or constant change in the threat landscape, in the technology, in the people, in our ideas, and then suddenly there's a war or another pandemic. So it does take a lot more than just having an audit and saying, now we did it, now we're happy. It's continuous, ongoing hard work.
Now, Quentin, you mentioned something that struck a chord early on. You mentioned the fact that cybersecurity is not just an IT issue, it's a finance issue. It's basically a strategic issue, isn't it, now for businesses? Can you tell us a bit more about this and how you go on about it at Cannons?
Yeah, so, I think it's one of the, I've been saying for years that we must not take cybersecurity and put it on a pedestal above all other business risks. But I actually now believe, I'm now starting to change my mind, that cybersecurity risk, especially the risk of ransomware, and all of the other threats around it are now starting to become one of the larger risks that most modern corporates face. The disruption, the data protection issues, the loss of competitiveness. And then once you've had all of those, you've then got the loss of opportunity on the other side, because when a company's come out of a ransomware incident or a major cybersecurity incident, the pendulum on their threat swings way over towards the conservative side, and so therefore they have opportunity. They lose opportunities because they decide they don't want to take risks. And being in business is all about taking risks. So you've got this like long tail of a security incident, and I'm now starting to become of the opinion that it's definitely maybe not the highest risk, but it's definitely in the top 5 risks that many modern corporates face, depending upon their exposure, depending upon the kind of products that they have, and depending upon sort of their attack surface. I think for most corporates, the ransomware and all of the other stuff that follows through from ransomware is probably in their top 5 risks. And I think it's important to be very mature and very open and very honest about that, and talk to your people and talk to your people at your company and say, look, we can try and do as much as we possibly can to defend. And that's good. But we also need to say that it's going to happen. And when it does happen, it could be really bad, or it could be something that we talk about at the coffee machine in a few years' time as, well, thankfully, that wasn't as bad as it could have been. And really what we want to do is we want to train and educate people so that we accept that bad things are going to happen, and we put resilience in the organization. And to Kai's point, that's all about culture. That's about making sure you have a culture of resilience, not a blame culture, a culture of we will get through this. That there might be darkness, but dawn will come. We will get there, and we will come out of the back of this. And do you know what? We'll be stronger. And also remembering, when we get out of this, let's not come out of this and say, oh, no, we can't make any kind of risky decision. We must come out of this actually in the same way, able to seize opportunities and able to be profitable.
So how do you create that security culture at Canons? Do you use a model or a methodology like the one developed by Kai, for instance?
So what we do is we talk to the people very openly and honestly. We've just done huge numbers of simulations, not just with the IT people. We do different levels of simulations, depending upon if they're technical people. We do very technical simulations at management levels. We've spoken to every single management team, and we've done a simulation with every single management team recently so that they understand what one of these incidents could be like. Because remember that ransomware incidents aren't always these ginormous incidents. They can also be relatively contained. They can be in a certain area, and they can be just as damaging and just as problematic. So it's about talking to people and making sure that we've used the standard NIST framework, where we sort of focus in on this sort of the identify and protect, and then we finish off with the recover. And we make sure that people understand what they need to do at all aspects. And not everyone has equal amounts of things to do at all different areas, but everyone has something to do somewhere along that particular model.
And how do you measure progress?
That there is the multi-million-dollar question. I think it's down to whether people understand where they need to go to find various documents. It's when you go back round and do the simulation for the second time with a slightly different scenario, and you start to plow through the simulation a lot faster, because people actually understand exactly the decisions that they need to make and the decisions that they don't need to make. It's very, very easy for certain groups to get hooked up on, should we pay, should we not pay? And that's an interesting conversation to have on the first couple of simulations. But then as they go through and they become more mature, they realize, actual fact, that's a decision that we taken over there. I don't need to worry about that particular decision. And that's how you start to measure sort of the progress of what we're actually trying to do. And when people start to say, actually, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get back to a steady state. We're not trying to work out who did it. We're not trying to work out what their names are. We're not trying to attribute this particular attack to anywhere. We as a corporate are trying to get back to normal steady state. Other people may do those things, but for the majority of the people, they're trying to get back to business as usual. They're trying to get back to life as it was last Tuesday or whatever day it was before the attack occurred. Not forgetting, obviously, what David was very clearly pointing out, that those attackers have probably been lurking in your network for a very, very long period of time. And if you can reduce that loiter time in your network down, That is where culture comes in. That's where you have IT admins who are curious, IT admins who say, I'm just going to have a look through those accounts tonight because I don't actually know. Yeah, hang on a second. What is that account that's doing? What was that doing there? And that's about culture, curiosity, and that's about security teams saying, look, this is not all about us. This is about all of us. This is about all of us coming together to try and defend this organization.
And you also think that moving away from a blame culture is absolutely essential.
Yes.
If you have a blame culture in your business, it's so damaging. That's not going to get you along the road to mitigating any kind of security risk if you're trying to assign blame. And again, that's what Kai was talking about with culture. It must not be a blame culture. That cannot be part of your security policy.
One of the biggest things with security culture is building motivation in your organization and willingness for security. So, and that's, to be fair, that's very hard to do because they're doing their regular job. Security is not, in most people's mind, is not their job.
That's IT, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. So integrating that and creating that motivation, that's hard to do. So question for me, Quentin, how do you do that at Canon? How do you integrate security into the mindset of all of the divisions that basically think that, well, security, cool, we've got a security team. That's what they're there for.
So that's actually where I slightly disagree in a respectful way. Because there was a lovely story that came up about a gentleman who was, I believe, was a security guard at one of the big NASA projects. And they asked him, what do you do? And he said, I'm working on helping people get to the moon. Now, the point here was he was a security guard on a building. He could have said, what's your job? I come in for 8 hours. I stand at that door and I make sure no one who's not been. But he saw the bigger picture. He saw the bigger picture that his job was about getting people to the moon. His part of that job was to make sure nobody unauthorized came through that door. I'm paraphrasing the story horribly. And that's about what I reckon, that's the sort of the analogy I like to tell people to say, yes, security is most of my job and finance is most of your job and HR is most of your job, but we are all here together. We're all here to make sure the company is profitable. And one of those things is making sure we have the right financial process, the right financial control, the right HR process, and the right security bits. But we all are responsible for all different aspects of that. Because if I were to take that, and I had a conversation with someone and I said, look, if I were to take an attitude, and I'm going to be facetious here and say, if I would say, okay, well, finance is finance's job, therefore I should be able to spend whatever I want to spend, and your system should stop me from accidentally spending more than I'm authorized to spend. Well, finance would very quickly say, well, yes, we have financial rules. Here is a policy. You need to stick to the spirit of it, not just a letter, and don't bounce off the constraints in the system when you know you shouldn't be doing it. And I say exactly the same thing. So, well, you understand that. And that's what finance people explain to people all the time, because you can't think of every different scenario. The same thing in information security. And when you kind of like link their job to your job and say, look, we're all part of here. We're all here to achieve a bigger aim. Then suddenly you see that light turn on. And you can have that conversation, you should do, with your supply chain as well, with your key supply chain partners. And I think the other thing to remember as well is when you can't make a change, sometimes you need to accept that sometimes you can't make a change. And don't get disheartened. If you can't make a change, stop spending effort on it, regroup, go back, have a chat, escalate, and say, what can we do here? Do we accept this as the new normal, or can somebody else make a change here? Because you can't always make a change everywhere, and sometimes you can't make a change everywhere yet. I've had situations, I've been at Canon, I've been privileged to be at Canon for a very long period of time, which means that I've seen scenarios where I've tried to fix things, and even yesterday, something got fixed that I had been trying to fix for a very, very, very long time, like greater than 5 years. And yesterday it got fixed because of something I did accidentally. I think something I did accidentally the other week. I had a meeting with someone, I mentioned something and it all got fixed. And now I've suddenly gone, oh God, if I'd done that 5 years ago, maybe it would have worked, maybe it wouldn't have worked. Maybe now was the change that thing could have been fixed.
Cool. So how do you see your role, because you're a CISO, right? So how do you see your role, your part in security culture then?
I'm setting the security culture. Everything that comes out of my mouth is about setting the security culture. Because at the end of the day, I'm kind of like the ringmaster. Everyone else in the circus is doing their various different acts and doing their various different things. And I'm the one that's sort of the ringmaster trying to guide everyone in and trying to say, no, that needs to be done slightly better. But you predominantly understand how to do your job. I can't tell you how to do a finance job or an HR job, but I can say where there are certain aspects that from a security perspective could be improved. And my job is also to listen to these people to say, if I believe that you're not doing it at the level that I believe you should be doing it at, why? Is it because my expectations are too high? Is it because you don't have the tools? Is it because you don't understand why? Well, I can educate. I can try and provide the tools. I can readjust my expectations. Maybe my expectations are too high. Maybe where you see the real picture and where I believe you need to be and where you believe you need to be, maybe where you need to be is acceptable, because we're not trying to be best. We're trying to be good enough.
And you're also trying to change mindset, ultimately, aren't you?
Yes.
The view, how you actually see your business, your job, your team through the lens of security. It's not top of mind, but it's there, and that's a change of mindset, and that's the difficult stuff, isn't it? That's where we talk about culture and how we're going to define culture. Changing mindset. That's kind of that's the hard stuff.
Yeah, and I think the main thing for me is to really get across to people that there cannot be business and profit without risk. And people understand that. And then you say, so information security risk, well, that's okay as well. It's okay to have information security risk. Not everything can be perfect. And of course, you get people go, well, yes, but I want zero. I want my KPI to be zero on there. And you go, well, zero on is unacceptable. You can't have that. You talk to some finance people and say, you couldn't have a KPI of zero defaults on debts. I mean, you know that you're going to have a certain percentage. Yeah. You drive towards that percentage, and you might be hoping to get to zero, but you know that in certain countries with certain customer mixes, it will be impossible. Well, the same for information security. I can give you KPIs that track completely with zero incidents, but I'll also give you zero profit and an infinite cost. Okay. And it's about finding that balance. And I think it's the information security person. The maturity is where you suggest what that level is. Don't wait to be told. And this again is the thing where you see the differences in maturities. And I talk to a lot of people in the industry where they're constantly bouncing off the stops. They're trying to do as much as they possibly can until they are told not to, or the buffer, they hit a particular restriction. And my attitude is, no, at a senior level, you should be able to define those yourself and not hit them. Don't let someone else be your brakes. Take your foot off the gas when you think it needs to be done.
And Quentin, do you find that you are working closer with the rest of the C-suite in establishing and promoting this security culture? And I'm talking about your business in particular, and maybe, and that's a question for Kai and Yellow as well. Do you see this happening in other businesses too?
So I work very, very closely with our entire C-suite, especially, for example, our business-to-business area, because security is very much top of mind in our customers. We see that my team is a bit different to a lot of other security teams in that we answer a lot of these security questionnaires from customers. We talk for example, I have a policy internally. We don't refer to colleagues as customers. Customers give us money. Colleagues we work with. Colleagues don't have a choice. Customers do have a choice. And I get quite annoyed when people refer to internal staff members. And we must remember that customers can go elsewhere. So we need to make sure that we give them the right information at the right time to meet their requirements and to suggest as well. That's the next level. The next level is being able to say to a customer, I think maybe you want to go a little bit further than this. And of course, you've got to be that respectfully, because you can't criticize, but you can suggest that maybe there are additional controls that you've seen implemented very successfully in other customers that they might want to consider in their print network or in the solution, in the B2B solution that you're providing to them.
On a global scale, we would like to see more of that integration, both with the C-suite, the board, but also throughout the organization. So Quentin is sort of a rare unicorn in this respect, and has been for at least the time I've known him. But that also makes him a very, very good example, and an example to follow. So when we measure security culture around the world, we see dramatic differences. And I wish they weren't, but more, I wish that they were better in general. So to give an example, we measure security culture and we have a scale called the Security Culture Index. This goes from 0 to 100, where if you score below 60 points, you have a poor security culture. If you are between 60 and 70, you have a mediocre, and then you move into medium, and then a good. The challenge is that we don't see any industry level measurements or even a country level measurement with good security culture. The best we see are 76 in this year's security culture report. And that tells us that there is a lot of work to be done out there. And one of the reasons we should be learning from people like Quentin, for example.
Yeah, that's what I see as well. People are very willing to build a good security culture. They understand the value of security. Security has become a boardroom issue. It's a business issue nowadays. So that's no longer the problem for us as an industry. The problem or the challenge that we have now is, so how do we help all of the people in this world to get to a good level? Because that 76 that Kai alluded to, that's not the majority. So we need to make sure that we help as many organizations out there get to that level through practical tips, how-tos, helping them by basically introducing them to people like Quentin, who can tell them, look, we've done this already, learn from me, learn from us, and try if this works for you guys. Because that's the other thing, it's not the same for everyone. Not everybody's equal here. It isn't, even though Kai wrote a beautiful book and it's called a playbook, it doesn't really mean that you can take that book and, hey, presto, you're there. You have to set your own guidelines. You have to look at your own business and look at does my unique business evolve? What steps do I need to take? That's basically a challenge and a responsibility that we as a security industry have. And that's something that we need to focus on for the coming years.
Or also, do we all think that can too much security be a bad thing? Is too much security, can it lead to paralysis at some point in the business if the focus is too much on that aspect of their business?
So I think actually Quentin answered that earlier when he said that, I can give you perfect security, but it will cost you more than you want to pay, right? So,
what do you want to do? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's about managing the risk.
Yep, that's true. Managing the risk, definitely.
And remember that you can accept risk. And one of the important points that we've done is by working so heavily with our business people. So I have people who are technically on the payroll of our business, or that technically they are on the payroll of our business, embedded in my team. And I do their objectives, their performance management, and people see them as my team members because they're my team members. But one of the advantages of doing this is that we learn from each other. It's not me telling our business how they should do the security bits. It's me learning from them. And that learning goes both ways, and you must never, ever forget that. And so the culture that we've set here kind of came from a combination of us coming with one side of the story, customers, and then, I need another third hand, here, coming from the other side, with business people coming in with what their thoughts were, and then blending those three things together. We kind of said, actually, this is where we want to be. That's where, and we're not there. I mean, that's the point. Is it's a journey, not a destination. To quote, forget who said that. But we're never going to get there. It's always going to be a learning. Every day is a learning journey.
It's an evolution that you have to do together. You with the business, security with the business, and the business with security. And then take into account that it's not easy to do with all of the supply lines, the interconnectivity that we have as businesses nowadays, the digitization and all of those fancy words. Security will be much harder in 10 years than it is today. It's much more complex. But as long as you have the business on your side, as long as they understand why you're doing it and they understand why you are doing it and vice versa, then we have a good chance of actually becoming more secure as a whole, to keep on doing our business, to make sure that our availability, our confidentiality, and our integrity, our CIA model is covered. And I think that's what we're striving for altogether.
Actually, you make a very good point just there about getting the business on your side, because by making sure that your business people understand about the inevitability of security incidents and that some security incidents are natural and healthy and should be occurring. When we talk to third parties, we say, so tell us about the number of security incidents you've had. And some go, we've had none, we're really secure. And we go, really? I reckon you're just not looking for them, because if you're doing what you're saying you're doing, you should have had some. Having some is totally natural and acceptable. But making sure that your business people understand that the first call should not be on the major incident to fire the head of information security. I know that occasionally, culturally, sometimes in certain countries, that comes up quite clearly. And that's something you need to say, really, that's not going to help. Unless the person was negligent in getting you to that point. So make sure your business people understand that security incidents are natural and healthy and are part of business. Just how you deal with them is actually is what matters.
And then that point goes broader than just the CISO. That goes to anyone who has some sort of security incident. Let's say that you have an employee somewhere who did something, for example, sharing credentials, then your culture is very telling on what they do next, right? So they share it, they probably, or maybe sometimes not, discover what they did. And then, okay, so do I call someone and report this incident? Or will that actually get me fired? So it's better for me to, just zip up and do nothing.
We have a policy on our incident reports that we take the names out of the incident report, because if we have patient 0 was this person, you can probably work at the business unit, but we'll take the names out because it's not important. I want people to have confidence that if they report something to us, that so long as they try to act in the right way, that's it. We accept it in the spirit that they try to do things, because you're absolutely right. Anyone can click on something they shouldn't have clicked on. My own staff.
Not very often, but it happens.
On April Fool's Day, managed to get me to click on something when they managed to convince me that a lake that I like to fish was going to be filled in to make extra car parking for Canon. And
I can imagine
my disapproval. It was beautifully done. It was spectacularly done. And of course, I went there. I was like, how dare you
do that? No.
I was like, oh God, thank you. You got me. Yeah, well done. Brilliant. And that just shows that anyone can, with the right lure, anyone can click on stuff.
We're human. We make mistakes. That's simply it. Don't call it a fault. It's not a fault. We simply make mistakes. It's part of who we are. Yeah. The sooner organizations accept that, look, it's very simple. You can fire someone. Sure, you can. But then you lose so much more than just that person. You lose motivation in other people. It's a fear factor that you instill in your organization. And just think about it. You might have fired a person, but that person also takes all of their experience, all of their skills with them. What do you do if the CEO messes up? If he makes a mistake, are you going to fire him? Sometimes they do.
Under the carpet.
Yeah. No, well, that happens too, but sometimes they do. Yeah. But it's a perfect, any incident is also a perfect situation to create an example for the rest, to create to communicate about it, to tell everyone, look, we did this went wrong. That happens. This is what we fixed it. Now, next time, what will you do if something like this happens? It's a learning experience. And the sooner organizations start looking at mistakes as learning experiences, the sooner I think that not only security will improve, but business will improve. Because it's not only security where mistakes are made. It's throughout the entire business. Security is no different with that. So, yeah.
I like your mention of communication, Jelle. And I'll give a plug for the Security Culture Report again. This year, we are actually looking into the size of organizations around the world and across the 7 dimensions. And communication is one of those dimensions, right? And what we see there is very interesting. Small and medium-sized organizations generally do better when it comes to communication than large enterprises. So, Quentin, I think, again, you are one of those few who actually managed to do this well. But I would love to see numbers from Canon too.
That's a challenge.
We'll have a conversation afterwards, Kai. But just on that last point, by the way, something that we've spotted is those people who do make mistakes, because you don't chastise them, suddenly become your greatest advocates. And we have, and I won't mention names, but we have a list of people who we have had problems with in the past who now we consider them to be friends. They're friends of the team. They're the greatest advocates of information security. And they're the ones who say things when you're not in the room. I remember someone saying like culture is what people do when you're not looking. Well, security culture is exactly the same. It's what do people do when they don't think they're going to get caught? And that's something that you can instill at all different levels. And I think one of the ways that I always say it to my team is we always follow our policies, even if it's not logged. We always follow our policies, because if we don't follow our policies, how can we expect anybody else to follow them? And that is the start of a decent security culture, is about saying that everyone is equal. Everyone follows the same policies, because guess what? If you can't follow the policy, we change the policy. We don't have unenforceable policies.
Yeah.
And that for me is, if you build up those people who have made mistakes, who have done stuff, have been human beings in the past, and you build them up and say, right, okay, well, you're unlikely to do that ever again because you know what goes on if you do that. Those are the people who talk to all the other people very credibly when you're not around. So suddenly you end up these advocates, these unofficial advocates for information security, who are talking very powerfully because they're talking from personal experience.
And from storytelling, we know how strong personal experience is.
Well,
we do the STAR interviewing model when we're constantly looking for, what have you done? Tell me about what you've done, what you've achieved.
So sharing stories. Everyone, it really has been a great discussion. Still more to talk about, I'm sure, but I feel it's time to wrap up. But before we do, I'd like to ask you for your final thoughts on the topic of cybersecurity culture and maybe your top tips. Okay, so how do you achieve it? And what are the key ingredients to succeed?
I think top tips are kind of difficult to sort of define for everyone. I think it's a case of look at your particular business, your sector, where you're actually trading, what's important to your business. But I still believe that you have to have sight. You have to have an overview. You have to see what's happening. That's the kind of data. That's understanding what's happening in your business. So if you don't have that, if you don't have an overview, a sight of how you connect your business together, how your systems of communication work, that's the first thing. And I think the overriding, the tip, I guess, from this conversation is build that culture. And that culture starts with people. Because if you spend time and resources doing that, security becomes almost subconscious. That's kind of what you want. You want it almost to be just an innate part of what people do. They're, what every day, not something they really even have to think about. It's just part of what they do in their job. That's kind of subconscious idea. That's, you change the mindset and it becomes part of just doing your job well. I think ultimately that's the goal. That's the goal for every business, to create that kind of culture and that kind of view of what security actually is within your business.
Who wants to go next?
Yellow, that's it.
Yellow, okay, cool. So I've seen a lot of companies that mostly unknowingly are already building a security culture, because it's always there. And if you're working on security, you're also working on security culture. It just happens. What I do see is that some organizations are simply not willing to fail. They don't understand that Rome isn't built in a day. Sometimes you erect the buildings, cool, but the foundation might be rotten. So, hey, it comes down again. You have to start all over. So a willingness to fail is something that you definitely need to see. Some people might do their absolute best to work on a project on security culture and might not do it the right way. You as an organization, you need to understand that, hey, people make mistakes, even in that regard. So a willingness to fail is very important. I also think that what we tend to do in business in general is we don't encourage people enough. We don't tell them enough, like, you're doing a good job here. We're not rewarding them enough. We're not rewarding positive behavior enough. And positive behavior, if we start rewarding it, it's a showcase to other people to see, oh, look, that's good. That's what I should be doing. Hey, and they start to follow that. And lastly, and that's what I also see is security culture can be a very intangible topic. It can be very hard to grasp for people not in the industry or not working on it. So make it relatable. Storytelling is a great way to do that. It's something where you actually storytelling creates some physiological differences in your brain, creates some chemical reactions. So employ storytelling. Make sure that you take people along on that journey. Those three are probably my top tips.
Kai or Quentin, your final thoughts on the topic?
Shall I go next and let Kai finish off?
Absolutely. Thank you, Quentin.
So I think that you get the culture that you deserve. And I know that sounds a bit harsh, but it's true. But you must remember that culture can change. So the culture that you have today, if you don't like it and you do the measurement with KnowBe4's tools or with anybody else's tools, and you say, I don't like that, it can change. You can change it to something. And you remember that it's not going to change overnight. Culture is something which is the culmination of all of the other aspects of security and all the other things you do. The top level thing it comes to is security culture right at the very end. So don't believe that you can change it overnight, because you've got to do a lot of unrelated things underneath to eventually change that thing. And I don't think you can directly change culture. I think you can change lots of stuff underneath, and then that will influence and will then produce what becomes what you call your culture. My top tips for for the culture that I want to create, because remember, what I want to create and what I consider to be good may not be what you consider to be good. And this is following in from what Jelle said, is about really basically praise people. But I think the main point for me is be open, be honest, and be clear. Because sometimes information security people fail because they're not open about the risks. They believe that they have this belief that they can protect everyone from everything, and they can't. You can help, you can influence, but at the end of the day, it's people out there doing things and making decisions, and you've got to try and influence them. You've got to let them know, look, sorry about this, but you are kind of on your own for most of these things. When things go wrong, I can step in and help you. But for the 99%, you'll be doing things yourself. Be honest about the risks to them so they understand, and be honest with yourself about what you can actually achieve. Don't stand in front of your senior leadership team and say, I can prevent all things from ever happening if you give me enough money. Someone asked me the other day, what's the worst words that a CISO can hear? And everyone's going, oh, there is no budget. And I replied back with, the budget is infinite. That's probably the worst things you can hear, because it's worse than having no money. It's having, here's all the money you want. Because do you know what? I still reckon you couldn't achieve what you want to achieve, even with infinite budget, because it's not always money. It's people need to do things. You need to have an organization that needs to change. And you can't pay people out of that. Otherwise, you'd start a brand new organization with clones of yourself. And the last one is be clear. Be clear about what you actually want, and be clear to yourself about what you want, and be clear to your senior management, and be clear to your staff members. This is the direction we're trying to go in. This is what good looks like, and this is what we're trying to achieve. And I think if you can do all of those three things there, I think you'll start to get the culture that you want.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Kai, last but not least.
Thank you. So my comment on culture is that culture is actually very, very easy to change. The only constant when it comes to culture is change. It is constantly changing, which means that it's not about changing it, it's about controlling that change that goes on all the time. And to Quentin's point, then, that means that whatever things you put in place will influence it. So make sure that whatever you put in place makes it into that direction you want it to go. Now, how do you do that? Well, here's my 3 tips. Apply something that you can learn from others. For example, the security culture framework. In the book, yes, another plug, we are proposing a somewhat changed version of the framework. And here we are talking about 3 points. Number 1, measure. Number 2, involve. And number 3, engage. What does that mean? Well, the first one, measure. You need to figure out where you are. And that may be figuring out what is your supply chain looking like? What is your organization looking like? What is whatever looking like? You need to figure that one out. Then you start involving. And involving here is about communication, it's about listening, it's about making sure that they listen, it's about lifting this to the board level, to the executives, but all the way down to the floor as well. And then the third one is engage. I mean, nothing is more boring than boring, but few things are more engaging than being engaged in something. So bring people into your program, tell them stories, let them fail, and then help them to realize how they failed and how they can avoid that in the future. And then bring these people out in your organization. Let them talk about their failures and their learning points. Use whatever tools you have available, and you will control your culture. You may never reach that level that you want to do ultimately, sustainable security culture, because there may be stuff outside of your control that influences. I mean, we have someone to the east of us who certainly did something that we didn't really want, but you can then adapt to those changes. So those are my tips.
Well, thank you very much, Kai, David, Quentin, Jelle. Thank you so much for your insights today. After this discussion, you do not know how to create this holistic and solid security culture. I don't know what we'll do, but thanks to all of you today.
Thank you.
And thank you out there for watching as well. Thank you.